I hate myself and I want to die. For most artists, that might sound like a dark metaphor, a cry for help, maybe even an act of rebellion. But for Kurt Cobain, it was more than a lyric. It was a window into his soul, a foreshadowing of the pain he carried, pain that would one day consume him. Kurt Cobain, the reluctant voice of a generation, never wanted the spotlight. Born in 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington, he was sensitive, creative, and deeply introspective. As Nirvana exploded into global fame in the early 1990s, the world saw Cobain as a symbol of rebellion, the face of grunge, the poet of the disenchanted youth. But behind the screaming crowds and platinum records was a man collapsing under the weight of expectation, addiction, and despair. By the time Nirvana released In Utero in 1993, Cobain's pain was no secret. His lyrics were confessions disguised as poetry. In I Hate Myself and I Want to Die, a song title that made fans uneasy, Cobain's words echoed with dark humor and brutal honesty. He joked about it in interviews, claiming it was a sarcastic jab at his public image, but those closest to him knew it wasn't just a joke. It was a warning. Kurt's life was a war between love and suffering. He adored his wife, Courtney Love, and their daughter, Frances Bean. But his struggles with chronic pain, heroin addiction, and depression made peace impossible. He often told friends he felt trapped by fame, by the music industry, by himself. In private writings and interviews, he spoke about his fear of becoming a sellout, of losing authenticity, of living a life he no longer recognized. In March 1994, just weeks before his death, Kurt overdosed in Rome after mixing champagne with Rohypnol. Courtney called it an accident, but others saw it as a suicide attempt. Doctors revived him, and for a brief moment it seemed like a second chance, a new chapter. But inside, Kurt was already fading. He withdrew from the world, avoiding shows, friends, even bandmates. On April 5, 1994, in his Seattle home, Kurt Cobain wrote his final note, part farewell, part apology, part confession. He spoke of love for his family, but also of emptiness, exhaustion, and the weight of not feeling joy in his music anymore. Thank you all from the pit of my burning, nauseous stomach, he wrote, for your letters and concern during the past years. I'm too much of an erratic, moody baby. I don't have the passion anymore, and so remember, it's better to burn out than to fade away. Then, with a shotgun and a single pull of the trigger, he ended his life at just 27 years old. When his body was found 3 days later, the world stopped. The icon who gave voice to a generation of outcasts had fallen silent. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a grim fulfillment of the warnings he'd been giving all along. Through songs like Pennyroyal Tea, All Apologies, and I Hate Myself and I Want to Die, Kurt had been telling us again and again that he was slipping. In the years since, fans and friends have wrestled with the same haunting question. Could anyone have saved him? Maybe not. Because Kurt wasn't just predicting his death, he was living it in slow motion. Every lyric, every sigh, every pained performance was a breadcrumb leading to that final day. Kurt once said, "I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not." And that's what made him different. He never hid his flaws. He never sugarcoated his demons. He turned them into art, raw, honest, and unforgettable. He didn't just shape the sound of the 1990s, he embodied its fragility, a generation raised on rebellion but haunted by self-doubt. In the end, Kurt Cobain's life was both a masterpiece and a warning. He wrote his fate in melody and verse, leaving behind a legacy of genius, grief, and truth. Kurt Cobain didn't just predict his death. He sang it, lived it, and left it behind, not as a surrender, but as a final, aching note in a song the world will never stop replaying. "I've been shot and murdered, can tell you how it happened word for word." Those weren't just lyrics, they were prophecy. Tupac Shakur, poet, revolutionary, and one of the greatest rappers to ever live, once spoke his death into existence. And just months later, that prophecy came true on a warm Las Vegas night. In the final years of his life, Tupac seemed obsessed with fate, with destiny, and with death. He spoke of it constantly in interviews, rhymes, even private conversations. In If My Homie Calls, he rapped the chilling line, "I've been shot and murdered, can tell you how it happened word for word." He told friends he felt surrounded by enemies. He told journalists he didn't expect to live past 25. And in a 1995 interview with Vibe magazine, he said, "I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world." He knew his time was limited, and he wore that knowledge like armor, loud, defiant, unbreakable. On September 7, 1996, Tupac attended a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. After the match, he and his entourage got into a fight in the lobby with Orlando Anderson, a known Southside Crip. Hours later, as Tupac rode in the passenger seat of Suge Knight's black BMW, a white Cadillac pulled up beside them on Flamingo Road. 4 shots rang out. Tupac was hit twice in the chest, once in the arm and once in the thigh. He was rushed to University Medical Center, where he fought for 6 days. But on September 13, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead at just 25 years old. Fans began replaying his songs, searching for meaning, trying to understand how their hero had seen it coming. The clues were everywhere. "In Only God Can Judge Me," he warned, "my every move is a calculated step to bring me closer to embrace an early death." In So Many Tears, he reflected, "Back in elementary, I thrived on misery. Left me alone, I grew up amongst a dying breed." It was as if Tupac knew the ending, as if his lyrics weren't just reflections of pain, but revelations of fate itself. In the decades since, conspiracy theories have multiplied. Some claim he's alive, living in Cuba. Others say his murder was orchestrated by gangs, rivals, or even the music industry. But one truth remains unshaken. Tupac felt death approaching. He said it, he wrote it, he lived it. He turned mortality into poetry and prophecy into power. Tupac once said, "Reality is wrong. Dreams are for real." Maybe his reality was too raw, too heavy, and in his art, he found the only space where truth could survive. In predicting his death, Tupac didn't surrender to fate. He exposed it. Though his body fell on Flamingo Road, his voice still echoes, word for word. Living on borrowed time, without a thought for tomorrow. Those words, gentle, almost wistful, would become hauntingly prophetic. John Lennon, a man who preached peace, who dreamed of a world without war, once sang about borrowed time. And before the year was over, that time ran out. By the late 1970s, Lennon had retreated from the chaos of fame. After years of protests, controversies, and exile battles, he sought peace in the quiet rhythms of family life. He and Yoko Ono raised their son Sean in New York City, a place Lennon loved for its energy and anonymity. After 5 years away from the music scene, he returned in 1980 with the album Double Fantasy, a project filled with warmth, reflection, and gratitude, but also a deep awareness of life's fragility. In one track, Borrowed Time, Lennon sang, "Living on borrowed time, without a thought for tomorrow." To most, it was a celebration of renewal, of surviving the storms of youth. But for those who'd followed his journey, the political threats, the death threats, the shadow of paranoia that trailed his fame, the words sounded eerily like a premonition. Lennon had long been aware of danger. He told friends he felt exposed. Fame had stripped away his privacy, and his openness to the world, once his greatest strength, made him vulnerable to anyone's obsession. December 8, 1980 began as an ordinary day. Lennon spent the morning giving interviews, speaking about his hopes for the new decade. He signed autographs outside the Dakota, the iconic Manhattan apartment he shared with Yoko. One of the fans waiting there was a quiet, unassuming man named Mark David Chapman, holding a copy of Double Fantasy. Lennon smiled, signed it, and went about his day, unaware he'd just met his killer. That evening, after finishing a recording session, Lennon and Yoko returned home. As they stepped from their limousine toward the archway of the Dakota, Chapman waited in the shadows. At 10:50 p.m., 5 shots shattered the silence. Lennon was struck 4 times in the back. He collapsed just inside the building's entrance. Yoko screamed for help. The doorman wrestled the gun away. Chapman stood calmly, reading a copy of The Catcher in the Rye as police arrived. At Roosevelt Hospital, doctors worked desperately to save him, but the wounds were too severe. At 11:15 p.m., John Lennon, musician, activist, father, dreamer, was pronounced dead. He was 40 years old. When news broke, the world fell into stunned silence.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin from NBC News. Former Beatle John Lennon is dead.
Vigils formed in cities across the globe. Millions wept, not just for a legend lost, but for the cruel irony of it all. A man who preached peace was gunned down at his doorstep. A voice that had urged love and unity was silenced by violence. In the days that followed, fans revisited his final songs. Borrowed Time, recorded months earlier, took on new meaning. Living on borrowed time without a thought for tomorrow. A line that once spoke of gratitude now felt like a farewell. Lennon had lived a life that constantly brushed against danger, political surveillance, stalkers, the weight of fame. But in his final months, he seemed almost at peace, as if he knew his borrowed time was nearing its end. John Lennon's story isn't just about tragedy, it's about the fragile beauty of awareness, a man who had seen the worst of the world and still believed in the best of it. His death was sudden, but his intuition was sharp. He sensed the fleeting nature of life, and he turned that awareness into art. In his last interview, hours before his death, Lennon said, "I consider that my work won't be finished until I'm dead and buried, and I hope that's a long, long time." He smiled, unaware of how close that end truly was. John Lennon lived and died on borrowed time, and though his voice was silenced, his message remains. Love is fragile, peace is precious, and every moment, every borrowed second matters. And in their wake of their greatness, the questions remain. Fame, genius, and prophecy. 3 threads that bind Kurt Cobain, Tupac Shakur, and John Lennon in a chilling tapestry of self-awareness and fate. Each man, in his own voice, seemed to glimpse the shadow approaching long before it arrived. Cobain's cries of self-loathing masked the torment of a soul too fragile for the weight of his own creation. Tupac's verses, raw and fearless, read like journal entries from a man racing against time, convinced his end was written. Lennon, weary yet hopeful, sang of borrowed time, a peace he knew could never last in a world haunted by obsession and violence. Their stories reveal a haunting symmetry, visionaries so attuned to life's impermanence that they began to narrate their own endings, blurring the line between premonition and inevitability. In each case, art became both confession and curse, a mirror reflecting not only genius, but the heavy cost of living too close to the flame. If art imitates life, can life also begin to imitate art, leading creators to fulfill the very destinies they describe? Were these men predicting their deaths, or simply narrating the pain of living in a world that could never understand them. I've presented the 3 crimes. Now the jury, that's you, delivers your verdict. The case reopens in the comments.